And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Tomorrow morning's flying weather graphic showing mostly IFR shifting up to the north here from all the way up to the Arctic coast, back down into Kotzebue, Buckland area, and marginal VFR through the central interior down to the North Gulf Coast, where we run into some more IFR there just south of the Kenai Peninsula, actually maybe into Kachemak Bay, and eastern North Gulf Coast and the Panhandle starting out IFR, marginal VFR, Bering Sea, Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula. And for the afternoon, less IFR for the southeast coast and the North Gulf Coast as well, but holding in around either side of Yakutat. And now that IFR right up to the central and eastern Arctic coast on out to the Arctic, improving here with some VFR showing up on the north slope. A lot of VFR here for the interior from the Yukon River right on down across Cook Inlet, Manuska, into the Susitna Valley, improving slowly though over the southeastern Copper River Basin. Marginal VFR remaining off the coast here and out in the Bering Sea from about St. Matthew Island, Pribilofs down to the eastern Aleutians westward there to Shimianat. And for Wednesday morning, not much change out here over the Bering Sea and the Aleutians with a lot of marginal VFR. But now that slipping on into the southwest coast, northern Bristol Bay, Togiak, Dillingham, over to possibly King Salmon, Kodiak stays VFR, south central Alaska, the interior from the Seward Peninsula, eastward there to Eagle, into Canada VFR, IFR lingering over the eastern Arctic coast, and pretty good improvement here for the southeast coast, marginal VFR down to the south there. Otherwise, the northern three quarters about looking VFR for the morning hours, and the afternoon, things go downhill again with some IFR becoming a little more widespread there for the southeast coast. But North Gulf Coast, northward to the Brooks Range, VFR. And also out to the west here, some marginal VFR sneaking up to St. Lawrence Island and in across Togiak Bay and up along the western Alaska Range, marginal VFR, Arctic coast, and the North Slope. And some IFR showing up around Adak and possibly Atka. Passes, Anatuvik and Adigan for tomorrow, looking good. VFR for both passes there in the Brooks Range. Alaska Range looking good as well. VFR, Lake Clark, Merrill, and Rainy, as well as windy, all VFR. Same forecast for Isabel and Mentasta, good VFR. Tanita looking good with VFR flying, as well as Portage, Chilkoot and White. Marginal VFR could start out IFR early, but generally improving throughout the day. Could become VFR later in the afternoon. For the freezing levels, 2,000 to 4,000 feet here across the southeast coast. Otherwise, you can see the surface well south of the area and just south of the central Aleutians. Moving on to icing, not too much out west here. A couple areas of possible isolated moderate icing there near the Pribilofs, kind of shifting east-southeastward. Another zone back out over the western Aleutians, but nothing significant. And mostly icing, again, shifting northward and right along the central and eastern Arctic coast. A little bit more here southwest of the Panhandle. And for the jet stream, southwest winds 120 to 125 knots from the eastern Gulf of Alaska across the northern Panhandle. And easterly, 75 knots there for the North Slope. Across the Bering Sea, 33,000 feet, westerly winds at about 70 knots. And at 9,000 feet, westerlies 40 to 60 knots across the southern Bering Sea. And to the north here, we've got 55 knot westerlies around St. Lawrence Island and 60 knots out of the southwest there blowing across Kodiak, about 40 knots for the Alaska Peninsula. South-southwesterlies 40 to 55 knots over the eastern interior and turn east-southeast at about 40 knots for the western Arctic coast. For the southeast coast, 40 to 55 knots here. Actually, 40 to 55 knots over the eastern interior. 3,000 feet, much lighter winds for the Panhandle, light there, light southern Alaska. Most of the interior looking at light winds at 3,000 feet. And then some westerlies at about 30 knots there for the North Slope to the Arctic coast. A couple of small lows here with some pretty good winds associated with them, about 55 knots there for Kodiak Island. And our 50-knot winds around this low pressure area, mostly affecting the Pribilof Islands. And out west, 40 knots from the southwest there across Amchitka Island. Turbulence, considerable moderate turbulence. Kodiak Island with that one system, also out around the Pribilof Islands. Otherwise, light to isolated moderate turbulence on Alaska in toward Cold Bay, and a narrow strip up there along the north slope to the eastern Arctic coast back to Cape Lisburne and Point Hope. Pretty smooth everywhere else.